Act 2, Scene 2. You were supposed to make these notes in your text already, so if you don't have them, now's the time to put them in. If there's anything that you want me to talk about to help you with your notes, then I'm glad to add to that. So the first item is plot. How do we know that a lot of time has passed since Act 1 finished? What are the clues? The ambassadors are already back, yeah. And how long would it take them to go and come back, do you think? Months? Well, how far is it from Denmark to Norway?
8 hours by plane.
8 hours by plane. I'm going to guess that they did not have a plane.
Multiply that by 5 and you'll get the boat.
Multiply that by 5 and you'll get the boat, but is that a motorboat or is that a human-powered rowing boat?
Bird box.
Bird box. I don't know. If Sandra Bullock has to row you there, it could take a while. They make some stops. Some crazy Dane comes up out of the water. Did you think I hadn't seen the movie? Then, once they get there, they have to go to the king, they have to report and deliver the letters, and then what? Hello. Then what? Get letters back, but what happens in the meantime, before and after? They wait, but don't you remember that the King of Norway does an investigation? What does he investigate? Fortinbras. The letters say, hey, Fortinbras is getting ready to attack Denmark, and the King of Norway is totally clueless, so he's like, well, I better look into it. The ambassadors, when they come back, say that the king had to look into it. So that's going to take a while too, right? All right, and then they have to return. So I'm thinking minimum a couple months, right? What's another clue that the time has passed between Act 1 and Act 2?
Long distance Reynaldo to check on their team.
Yes. Why does that mean time? He's going to wait a while before he sends somebody to check up on him, right? Yeah, I mean, he's maybe a little overbearing, but not so overbearing that he's going to send somebody to check up after him the next day. Okay. Anything else? Right. Ophelia says she already called it off a long time ago, and her father asks her, and that she's been rejecting his letters for a long time, ever since Polonius told her to, right? Anything else? No, that's pretty much it? Well, in the soliloquy we get an idea about Hamlet, right? Isn't he getting after himself and being mad for wasting so much time and not getting after the revenge?
Yeah.
So at the end of Act 2, he calls himself all kinds of names because he feels like he's been dragging his feet on the revenge thing. But if it was the next day, I don't think you should get mad at yourself about not immediately killing Claudius. So it seems like some time has passed, and that's something to think about. At the end of Act 1, we only have 2 days that happened. Because on day 1, at midnight, we have the ghost appearing to the guards and Ratio. The next day, there's the speech that Claudius gives, and they come and tell Hamlet that the ghost was appearing, and then that night, Hamlet goes up on watch. So that's really just 24 hours. Yeah. But then between Act 1 and Act 2, there's a whole bunch of time that has passed. So all of his, I'm going to kill Claudius anger at the end of Act 1 yielded what? Nothing. He has started acting kooky, right? We know that he's been acting kooky because the king and the queen have sent for his friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. There's another thing that shows the passage of time, right? Because they would have to send a person with the message. You can't just message somebody, right? You have to send a person on a horse with a message to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern asking them to come to Denmark. So that's going to take some time, and then their arrival. So Hamlet hasn't really done much except his crazy act, and that's kind of important to note for Act 2. Plot on B is about rising action. You're going to write an essay for homework about the rising action of the drama. But is there anything on the list there that you want me to talk about so that you can enrich your notes that you already did on that topic? How is Act 2 the rising action? Rising action is about character development, conflicts intensifying, right? If you have good notes, I think your homework will be pretty easy. All right, the next part is focus quotations, and for that we should go to the text, I think. The first quotation is Denmark is a prison. And Hamlet says that when he's talking to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, right? It's kind of a funny scene when Rosencrantz and Guildenstern show up to talk to Hamlet. Did you laugh at all or not really? If you didn't laugh, I think maybe you weren't getting it. No, you didn't laugh. Did you read it too quickly, maybe? Sometimes that happens. Where he says that actually is on line 236, right here. Hamlet says Denmark's a prison. But it's after he greets his friends Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, who have arrived for he doesn't really know why. He didn't call them. So he puts two and two together. Hamlet's not dumb. And he figures that the king and queen want to get to the bottom of his behavior, his crazy act. Well, they don't know it's an act, his craziness. And so they've called in two of his friends to see if they can find out why Hamlet has been acting this way. And when they go to address him, right, they have normal greeting on the bottom of page 43. Hello, how are you guys doing? And then he says, Rosencrantz says, oh, we're doing fine. Guildenstern says, we're happy. We're not the epitome. It's not the best day ever, right? We're not here on the top of fortune's, hat. But Hamlet says, well, I hope you're also not at the bottom. By fortune, we don't need money, we mean fate, right? And Rosencrantz says, no, not the bottom either. And then Hamlet kind of jokes with him and says, well, you must be around her private parts there in the middle, right? You're not at the top, you're not at the bottom. You're somewhere in the middle. So that's a spot where you could laugh. Or not. So then he says, what news, and so on and so forth. And Hamlet is depressed and sad, as we know, so he tells them that he's living there in prison, that Denmark's a prison. In what ways is Denmark a prison for him?
Because he can.
Okay, he's stuck there because Claudius and Gertrude won't let him go back to Wittenberg. Thank you.
Oh, my God.
Are there any other reasons why he might consider Denmark a prison?
He's trapped in his emotions.
Okay. His sadness is trapped and nobody else seems to be sharing it with him, right? Like trapped emotionally. Maybe he's trapped emotionally because he hasn't done the revenge that he promised his father's ghost that he would do. You could start to feel guilty about that, couldn't you? Yeah. Any other reasons that he might think Denmark's a prison? No? Well, he doesn't want to be there, right? Goes with the first part. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern don't really understand that. Rosencrantz says, then the world is one, like you're the prince of the place. That's not horrible. How bad could it really be? But what they don't understand is how he feels maybe trapped by the fact that he has to do revenge, right? Like maybe that's cornering him, that he has to come up with a revenge plan. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern aren't the smartest. They are kind of juvenile. And you can tell because over here on the next page, I'm just going to go through this a little bit and then we'll go back to the annotation guide. Over here, Hamlet addresses, why are you here, right? Because he didn't call for them. So he says on line 258, what make you at Elsinore? And they lie at first, don't they? They're like, oh, we just stopped by to visit you. Hamlet already knows that that is not true because he's pretty smart. And he says, were you not sent for? Is it your own inclining? Like, did you come on your own, or did somebody ask you to come? He wants to see if he can trust them. So he's asking them these questions to see if they'll be truthful with him or not, because they're really on the king's payroll. The king's going to pay for their trip and give them money and stuff like that to help them. I don't think that the king and the queen are trying to spy on Hamlet. I wouldn't go that far, because I would say that they're just concerned about his behavior. Over the last couple of months, he's been acting all Looney Tunes. And they don't know why, and he won't tell them. So I think a lot of parents would probably start questioning the friends of their son or daughter that they thought were really having a lot of trouble, to see what could we do to help, especially Gertrude. So even though they sent for Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, I think that the intention is a helpful one. But Hamlet has to make sure that he can trust them, and he finds out here that he might not be able to, because at first they lied to him. Eventually, though, Hamlet says, well, didn't they send for you? And they have to kind of admit it, but Rosencrantz says to Guildenstern, should we tell him? Right? And Hamlet at the same side and an aside, a little farther down the page here, says, I've got my eye on you, right? Like, so he's already aware that it's a little sketchy with those two guys. He says, if you love me, hold that off. Tell me the truth. And then they do tell the truth down here. So Hamlet has to already think that they're going to report anything that he says back to the king or queen. So if he tells them something about knowing that Claudius is the murderer, or a plan for a murder, he's probably shooting himself in the foot at that point, if he does that. So he's got to steer clear of them and keep it kind of light. He does have a philosophical moment right here, which is lost on Rosencrantz and Guildenstern. Rosencrantz and Guildenstern are kind of like the Beavis and Butthead of the play. Do you know who Beavis and Butthead are? No. There's an old show where Beavis and Butthead are like these idiot teenagers, I guess they're teenagers. And they make fun of stuff that people say, and they're just losery weirdos. So when Hamlet gives this philosophical talk here at the bottom of page 45, their reaction is kind of juvenile. They laugh at something, then turn something sexual that wasn't sexual, right? Like, that's what she said kind of situation. Right after Hamlet talks about his sadness and the depth of his sadness, there's this famous, it's not even a soliloquy, it's more of a speech, because this is written in prose. Prose is paragraph, right? Not poetry. Usually when the characters are speaking to a peer, they do not speak in poetry, or if they're not, like a king. So this is written in paragraphs, not in poetry. So that's something to keep an eye out for. He says, I have of late, but wherefore I know not, lost all my mirth. What's mirth? Happiness. He says, I don't know why. Wherefore means why. I've lost all my mirth, foregone all custom of exercises, and indeed it goes so heavily with my disposition that this goodly frame the earth seems to me a sterile promontory. This should sound a little bit to you like the first soliloquy. Remember when he was talking about how the whole, everything in the earth is all grown over and wasteful and, purposeless? He's kind of saying that again here. The earth seems to me a sterile promontory. What's a promontory? Vocab word. Incorrect. A promontory is like a cliff. So if I have a cliff that's not only a cliff that's, like an edge that you could jump off of and kill yourself, he's saying it's not just a promontory, it's a sterile, lifeless promontory. The earth. That's about as desolate as you can get. Right? To him, the earth seems a sterile promontory. This most excellent canopy, the air. Look above us. Some people see this beautiful firmament, this sky filled with stars, planets. It's majestic. But what I see is nothing but a foul and pestilent congregation of vapors. I just see a bunch of gas. The world is not beautiful to him anymore. He says, I don't know why. he switches gears then and says, what a piece of work is a man. Have you ever thought about that? How miraculous it is that right now your heart's beating and your lungs are breathing and you're not doing anything about it, like consciously? Or like how before you were born, your cells knew how to form the different parts of your body. Doesn't that stuff amaze you? When you stop and think about it? Or that you can read something and transmit it immediately into your brain and think about it. That whole process is pretty amazing. And Hamlet says, what a piece of work is a man, like a masterpiece. And we're all different too. It'd be one thing if God just cranked us all out the same, like just keep doing the mold, but we're all unique in addition to having all those qualities. How noble in reason. Well, we can think, right? Well, maybe not Friday afternoon before a long weekend, but we can all have the capacity to think. How infinite in faculties. Our abilities seem limitless. Because you can always keep learning stuff, can't you? Plus, they're always coming up with stuff. So, in a way, our ability to learn is endless. In form and moving, how express and admirable in action. Our bodies can express emotion. Think about dance, right? Or the way that we move through our day. Just that your legs can carry you. If you've ever been sick, or remember when I was in here on crutches? I'm thinking, man, I really took my legs for granted when I had them working. I just walked around everywhere, not even thinking about my legs. But now it's like everything takes me 10 times as long to get around on the crutches. Right? If you've ever pulled a muscle in your neck, you kind of had taken that for granted, right? You're like, oh, my neck, I can barely keep it up. But you don't think about that. Our actions are admirable. How like an angel in apprehension, how like a god. We're the paragon of animals, he says. What's a paragon? Yeah, like the perfect example. That's a vocabulary word too. Now I'm checking to see how much of your vocab you've done. Next time I see you is the quiz. Wednesday. How are we the paragon of animals? How are we better than all the animals? We can think, right? We can reason. We can invent things. If you go home and your pet guinea pig invented some new equation in math, I think you should probably get that guinea pig on some TV show. Harvard. Right? Yeah, the guinea pig can go to Harvard, I guess. But it's not going to happen. Why isn't it going to happen? They're not capable of thinking and inventing things like that. Right? You have to give that guinea pig his exercise wheel. Because you know he needs exercise and he does not know that. Right. So we're the paragon of animals, but what is man to Hamlet? Quintessence of dust. To me, these paragons walking around are just piles of dust. Dead creatures. Because don't they say, to dust you will return? You're already nothing to me. That's some deep thought stuff right there, right? And as he's speaking this philosophy and thinking about why is it that the world doesn't hold any wonder for me anymore and humans are just walking piles of death, he says, man delights not me. Man isn't interesting to me anymore. I can understand why he would say that, because he had a life that was full of all kinds of people, and now the people that he trusted aren't the people that he thought he knew, and are instead backstabbing murderers, like Claudius, right? But when he says, man delights not me, Rosencrantz starts giggling. Because he takes it like Hamlet's talking about his sexual partners. Men don't delight me. Right? Nor woman neither, he says, though by your smiling you seem to say so. And Rosencrantz is like, I don't know what you're talking about. And Hamlet says, well, then why did you laugh when I said man delights not me? He calls him out on it. But that conversation is cut short because then comes the actors. There's a bunch of players who show up. And that changes the direction of the scene somewhat. right? There are apparently some actors that travel around, and they've come to the castle to do some, performances. Actors had theaters, but there weren't a lot of them. And Hamlet talks about how at this point in time, it's sort of the fad to have children actors. So the idea is that people like to go to the theater to see these little kids act, and so all the adult actors, the trained actors, are kind of like kicked out of their theaters for the time being. And so these actors have come around on the road, and they go to, estates, and they say, hey, do you want a show? And they talk about that for a bit, and then the players show up over here on page 48. Hamlet welcomes them. Polonius comes back in. I'm on page 50. Hamlet says to the actors, come give us a taste of your quality on line 396. Now give us a little preview. We wanted you to stay and do a play for us tomorrow night, but give us a little preview. And now these actors would probably have memorized 20, 30 plays, because you have to be able to do whatever play the people say they want to hear. You have to be ready with that many. So Hamlet says, give us a little taste of your quality. And the actor, the player, says, what speech do you want me to do? Just name it, and I'll do it. Hamlet says, well, I heard you one time do this one speech. Can you do it? And he even starts it over here on the next page, Hamlet does. He says, it starts like this. I hope you did your background on the mythological story of Hecuba, Priam, and Pyrrhus. Because I think that really helps you understand the soliloquy, right? So he says, do this part from the Aeneid where they're talking about Priam's death. The rugged Pyrrhus, like the Hyrcanian beast. He says, no, not that line. It starts like this. And then he does this whole section that he does from memory. Hamlet does it. Do you have something like that memorized that you can just come out with? Maybe some song lyrics. We don't memorize things anymore. I don't think we do. I feel like we could always just look it up, so why do we have to devote our memory to it, right? So the actor starts and picks up where Hamlet leaves off. And there's a long section of that. He's telling the story from the Trojan War, when the Trojan War was ended, and this character Pyrrhus, who was a Greek, the Greeks defeat the Trojans at Troy. They burn Troy to the ground. But before that happens, Pyrrhus decides to punish the king the king Priam. First they kill the sons of Priam. They're grown men. They kill them, and they make Priam and Hecuba, the king and the queen, watch. Then they get Priam, and they drag him through his son's blood to the altar of Apollo, which is like a super desecration of their beliefs. And they sacrifice Priam right there, and they make Hecuba watch. That's pretty terrible, if you can imagine it, right? So the player's going through talking about all that stuff, about how ruthless Pyrrhus was and so on. Super serious scene. And then Polonius yawns and goes, oh, this is too long. Well, Hamlet says to the actors, he says, well, if it's not a little dance or a song, a little story about sex, then he falls asleep. So excuse my friend over here. He just doesn't know good acting when he sees it. And then the actor continues with Hecuba and her grief and delirium, describing that. Even Polonius says that the actor has changed color, and there's tears in his eyes, just on the spur of the moment. He's just standing there in the castle, and he drops this performance that's so profound, the actor's tearing up and making himself pale because he's taking on the role of Hecuba. The actor finishes up, and there's an important part. I would put a star here on page 53, because Hamlet pulls that actor aside and says, can you do this performance called The Murder of Gonzago? And they're like, well, yeah. He says, oh, we'll have it tomorrow. Prepare it for tomorrow. He's already got an idea. I think at this point we don't know that, but at the end of the soliloquy we can put 2 and 2 together and say, okay, I kind of see where he's going with that. They're going to do the murder of Gonzago, which it turns out is a lot like what happened to Old Hamlet, the murder of Old Hamlet. Polonius leaves, everybody leaves, Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, and then we get Hamlet's soliloquy, the rogue and peasant slave soliloquy. What's the first thing that he is talking about in that soliloquy?
How he can't act for himself.
How he can't, what?
Like express himself in a way that the actors can.
Right. He says, isn't it weird that the actor has more emotion toward a fake thing? Because he's not Hecuba. He doesn't care about Hecuba. He's crying, he's pale, and I can't get up even half of that emotion for a real thing that happened to me. What's the matter with me? Right? Like, I should still be angry that my uncle killed my dad, but what am I doing? I'm not doing anything about it. Right? What are some of the names he calls himself? Coward. It says down here at the bottom of the page, 54. I'm a coward. I, a dull and muddy-mettled rascal. Is he a coward? Maybe. I don't want to judge, but he was all fired up to do it, and then now it's a couple months later. You know. Why didn't he do it?
He mentions it later in line 56.
What does he say in line 556?
Maybe a devil, and the devil hath power.
You have to continue on the next line right there. To assume a pleasing shape. Maybe the ghost wasn't a real ghost, it was a devil sent to get me to do a murder. But he's just thinking of that now. What about the last couple of months? Not doing something, like not deciding on something, is still deciding. Because it's deciding not to, isn't it? I'm sure there's something that you're supposed to make a decision on. And you can make a decision right away and take care of it, or you can put it off and say, oh, I'll think about it. But what happens the more you think about it? Or the less urgent it seems to be, right? And then pretty soon, all that excitement that you had for that thing that you were going to do is just gone. It doesn't get done. Like, think about the summer. When the summer comes around, aren't you like, oh, this summer I'm going to start my workout routine. I'm going to eat healthy. I'm going to read lots of books. Whatever that wasn't on the list. You always read all the books. What's on the books? Oh, okay. I'm going to clean out my closet, whatever. And then it's the end of July, and you look up from your, like, Cheeto dust. And you're like, oh, man, I was going to do so much stuff this summer. I was so excited about my workout program. Wah, wah. I'm not surprised that Hamlet has delayed, but he was so powerfully driven to kill his uncle. And now he's just sitting around. I can understand why he's getting after himself. Don't you ever get after yourself like that? Call yourself names to motivate yourself? No? Wallow in the Cheeto dust? It's my cocoon. I have an alter ego called Dumb Wendy. Dumb Wendy makes all the dumb mistakes. So, like, I yell at her sometimes because she trips over the edges of carpets and drops stuff and it shatters and forgets important things. I can blame her. You know. Exactly. So he works himself with all these little insults. Where are his other insults? He calls himself an ass, right? Oh, I'm pigeon-livered and lack gall on line 534. A scullion on line 544. He says, what an ass am I, 539. I feel like he's trying to get angry enough again like he was at the end of Act 1. to get back into the mood of revenge and spur himself into some action. And he does come up with at least the beginning of a plan. Right here, there's a shift on line 545 where you see that long dash. He says, I have heard that guilty creatures sitting at a play have by the very cunning of the scene been struck so to the soul that presently they have proclaimed their malefactions. Malefaction is like sins, right? I don't know if that's true, but they need it to happen in the play, I guess. So he says, I've heard that when people go to a play and it's like a super good performance, that they're so moved that they admit to guilty things that they did. I've never seen that happen, but Hamlet says he's heard that. So what's he gonna do? This is from the quiz question, right? I'll have these players play something like the murder of my father before mine uncle, and then I'll watch him. Because even if he doesn't have like a big reaction, when he sees the thing happen on stage that he thinks nobody knows about, the pouring of the poison in the ear, which is sort of a weird thing. When he sees that happen, I'm going to see at least a second of a reaction on his face, and I'll know. Because he says, maybe that's my problem. I'm not 100% convinced that it really happened the way the ghost said that it happened. But if I stage this play this way, then I will know if I should continue with my revenge, because I'll be able to tell by his reaction. Right? And then we have the famous line at the very end, the play's the thing wherein I'll catch the conscience of the king. So there is a little bit of a plan. It's not really a plan to kill him, it's just a plan to find out if he should kill him. But at least he's moving forward a little, right? Baby steps. Murder, baby steps, right? All right, let's go back to the annotation guide. I think I talked about everything. Did you get some good notes? Hopefully. Character development. I think so. I think we got to everything. Is there anything on the paper that I didn't touch on that you wanted me to talk about? No? Everybody's good? All right, so the homework then, if I'll bring up the weblog here. The homework is I want you to write the first draft of an essay that explains how Act 2 is the rising action. So we've talked about how the rising action is where we see the intensification of conflict, all those things that are on plot B on the paper we just went over. So choose a few things, write a solid thesis statement, and then write some paragraphs that would prove how those things show the rising action of the play. And you're going to bring that with you on Wednesday? Is Wednesday the next time I see you? Wednesday, right?
Yes.
So we have the quiz, and I also want that essay with you. All right? We've been studying for that quiz for a long time, folks, so if you waited too long, I don't feel sorry for you. I want to play Act 2 for you from the Mel Gibson version.
Oh, that's it.